Well, hello. How are we doing, everyone? Right now, I don't have too many people in here. That's okay. I know that everyone's trying to, it's a new guy in town, and Amanda's not doing the AP Human Geography anymore. She wanted to kind of outsource that to somebody else who's got a lot of experience in doing the subject, and that way she can focus a little bit more on building her her organization to help you guys get fives on all the AP exams you take. So here I am. My name is Dustin Fowler. I'll be the facilitator now for the AP Human Geography course sessions that will be going on Thursday at 7:00 p.m. So I'm very, very excited to be with you guys. I will go ahead and share my screen with you so that y'all can see my presentation. So there it is. All right. And I just went small and the presentation went big. I've also got some subtitles up. I'm a big fan of, I think that it's helpful if everyone can see what it is that's being said at the same time as it's being said. And I think that's a nifty little tool that Google's got going on there. I might not catch everything exactly like I say it, but hey, it's a start. So I'm very, very excited to have you guys all here. Today, we're going to be talking about an intro to culture and its diffusion. So I have a poll. I think that everyone is able to, if I'm not mistaken, everyone is able to, let's see if I can get that out of the way. I think everyone is able to see the polls. If you get a chance, go ahead and go and take that poll. Right now, you're just looking at the first question. What are you studying currently in AP Human Geography? I want to have an idea of what it is y'all are studying right now with your teachers, just to kind of make sure that I'm gauging the pacing right as I plan for the future sessions. Right now, we are starting in culture, looking at the intro to culture and diffusion. That's what we're going to do tonight. And then next week, I plan on looking at language and then look further into the month where we're going to be looking at religion on Thursday night. So that's kind of the pathway that I have. And depending on where you guys are, we may kind of shake it up a little bit or look a little bit more in detail at certain parts of the Unit 3, the culture. So let me see. I'm going to go up here and show you guys. That's the objectives today. We're really going to focus mainly on classifying culture, examining the ways that culture spreads. That's called diffusion. We're going to look a little bit into that. There's two different main kinds of diffusion we're looking at, which is relocation and expansion. And then we're going to break expansion down into these further categories: contagious, hierarchical, and stimulus. Can everybody hear me okay before I go too much further? Give me a thumbs up or kind of say something over in the chat. Or I'm going to assume that everyone can hear me. So cool. Here we go. A little bit about me. Again, I said my name is Dustin Fowler. I've been a teacher for 11 years, teaching AP Human Geography for 8 of those years. I've been at basically the same school. I just moved to a new position, so I'm not teaching AP Human Geography in the brick and mortar right now. But I've had a lot of experience with the course, and I consider it my expertise when it comes to my subject of study. I served as an AP reader this past year for the 2018 exam. That was a really good experience. I still attend regular geography seminars that are offered at my state's Geographic Alliance. And I still am a course facilitator. In other words, I take the time to manage a online economics class for my state as well. I'm here, born and raised in South Carolina. You see a picture of my beautiful family over here on the side. And I've been married for almost 10 years. I love to be outside. That's one good thing about South Carolina is that it's still pretty, temperate outside. It's not hot, certainly not cold just yet. And so I get to go outside a lot. And I play cello in my church orchestra. So it's a little bit about me. I wanted y'all to know who it is that you're listening to on Thursday nights as you're trying to get more information on the course that you're taking. What were you thinking? I know exactly what you were thinking. This is an awesome course. There's a lot to it. Might be the hardest course you ever took. Might be just a new subject and a little bit difficult for everyone. So my job tonight is I'm going to try to break it down, make it as simple as I possibly can so you guys can all do awesome on the test and maybe even use this in preparation for your AP exam later on in the year. So without any further ado, let's get into the meat and bones of this topic. what is culture? Really, what that should say is, well, in this case, what is culture? We're really looking at culture as an intro as a whole tonight. And forgive me also for looking up this way. I'm using a dual screen, so I will be looking at my PowerPoint on my second monitor and flipping back and forth. Another thing, too, I wanted to make sure I told you guys is if you have any questions, be sure to ask that question in the Ask a Question. As long as the chat over on the side isn't getting super busy, I can even look there and see some questions for you as well. All right. So what is culture? It's what we care for, guys. It's anything that we do that we really care about a lot. The word cultus is a Latin phrase that means to care for, okay? Even the word agriculture has that word culture in it, and it means to care for the earth in a way that's going to allow it to sustain us through crops or whatnot. Our culture is best described as the things that we care deeply about. That can be, it can be religion. We think about things like religion being a really important part of who we are and our identity, but it's more than just that. It's also values. It's also the objects that we use, from computers to cell phones to, in particular, the Apple iPhone. So there's a lot that we're going to look at with culture. We're going to break it down in a few different ways. The first way we're going to do it is looking at culture as a visible or invisible culture. In other words, material or non-material. Okay. Now, examples of material or visible culture is going to be over here on the left. You got cars, iPhones, PlayStation 4s, the cello, clothing. I mean, a huge list, anything that you can see. It doesn't have to just be items either. Okay. Over this way, you've got things that are a part of who we are in terms of what we believe, or things you can't hold with your hands and see with your eyes. Things like religion, language, values, ideology, right? One important thing that I wanted to point out is that culture is always changing, okay? So both material and non-material culture is always changing. We didn't have iPhones whenever I was in high school. The cars were not nearly as fuel efficient as they were, and maybe not every family had 2 or 3 of them. Depending on where you are, that may be the case. At the same time, the things that we hold as our values have changed over time. Language changes and is always adapting to new words that may be brought into our vocabulary based on new technology or based on new interactions with other cultural groups. So culture is always changing. I wanted to look at a few terms, okay? A few like vocabulary words, because, you know, AP Human Geography truly, guys, is a course that's centered on understanding terminology. And I say that, you know, and you guys have heard that, I'm sure, from your teachers and anyone who knows the subject, but y'all, probably 60 or 70% of that test, multiple choice and FRQ, is going to be centered on your understanding and application of terminology. So with that said, one of the words you're going to see right off the bat if you're reading the Rubenstein book is this word habit. What is a habit? Well, a habit can be defined as anything that people are going to do on an individual basis that may not apply to an entire cultural group. All right. So for me, I've got this awesome picture of the Alchemist's Code. It's a little cell phone app, some gotcha game. You spend money on in-game currency, and then, you know, it's like a lottery system. You either get a great character or you get a terrible character, and you're able to build them up and things like that, like you would in any, you know, JRPG. Now, I'm a video game nerd when it comes to things like this, and I spent a huge amount of time playing this game. But probably most of you don't, if you've ever even heard of it. Some of y'all may not have even heard of this game, right? So this is going to be something that applies to me individually as a habit. Another thing is, you know, I know an individual who wears a kilt, you know, like the Irish kilt, you know, like something you would see somebody playing a bagpipe. This is not something that is, I would say, normal in our culture. So it would be a habit of that individual. Another thing is if someone, you know, might drink a very specific kind of drink all the time, like it's going out of style. For me, that's wild strawberry Crystal Light Energy. Now, I can't help myself when I get around that stuff. It just tastes so good. These are all going to be individual habits or things that help to define who I am as a person, but may not apply to the entire group. In other words, my community in which I live, or even the United States as a whole. A cultural trait is going to be a part of a culture that is better applied to a social group. All right. So maybe a language or a dialect might be a cultural trait. A sport that is played. I'm trying to make that go away. Sorry. Maybe a certain sport that's going to be big is part of one's culture. Down here in South Carolina, man, I couldn't tell you the first thing about hockey. I don't think I know a single hockey team. We just don't play hockey. I know that Columbia, the capital of South Carolina, used to have a hockey team called the Inferno. Soda City, also known as famously hot. So it makes sense that the Inferno would be the name of our hockey team, but it didn't really go anywhere. And now the Inferno doesn't play. So hockey is not a big deal around here. It may be a bigger deal further north. All right. Also, education is going to play a role in maybe a part, is probably going to be a part of our culture. It's going to be a cultural trait. Now, when you take all these different intertwining various cultural traits and you put them together and use them kind of to define a culture in broader terms, this is when you're looking at something like a cultural complex. Okay. So for example, if you look at the maps right here on the left, you're seeing a map of the red are those who voted for Trump in 2016. The blue, obviously, your Democrats. There are the blue states, the ones that voted for Hillary Clinton. Over here on the right, you've got a group that's showing the non-religious people in the United States. In other words, the lighter the color, like you see over here in the Bible Belt, the lighter the color, the more religious they're going to be. Okay, so people over here in my state are pretty religious. Same for these, southern states known as the Bible Belt. Well, southern Christian conservatives, we know from studying the election, overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump. And you see that. Also over here, these states are a little bit less religious. I'm sorry, a little bit more religious as well. So they tended to maybe vote for Trump because in a lot of cases, conservative values correlate with established religion. Now, I'm not saying that is going to be the case with everyone. I'm not saying you have to be a Christian to be a conservative or vice versa. But what I'm saying is that there is a degree of correlation with that. And so this might be a good example of a cultural complex when you take these traits and put them together. The next term that I wanted to look at is a cultural hearth, which is simply a point of origin. These right here are your cultural hearths, maybe your civilization hearths, early stuff you'll see in any world history textbook or maybe even your AP Human Geography book. Material that is visible culture is anything that can be held, touched, and even seen. Okay, we already talked about cars, tools, toys, clothing, and sports. But even architecture is going to be an example of our material culture or our visible culture. Even the kinds of activities we engage in, from movies to working in office buildings or working in schools or going to school, shopping in supermarkets, going to the movie, I just said that, going to sporting events. These are all examples of one's material culture. All right. You may not be able to hold a football game in your hands, but you can certainly see it. You can see the field. You can hold the football. You can touch the players. All these things are going to make it part of our visible, and that means, in other words, material culture. The non-material or invisible culture is going to be those things you can't see. And we're looking at religion and faith. We're looking at the language you speak. You can tell that I speak English, obviously, but you can't hold my English, and you can't hold the identity that goes with that in your hand. And when I say ideology, I'm talking about like, sometimes you hear it in terms of political ideology. All right, you hear somebody talking about what they believe in when it comes to liberalism or conservatism or things like that. And maybe ideology is a little bit deeper than that. We're not going to talk too much about that right now, but we just know that ideology and religion and values all go very, very closely and are going to be part of our non-material or invisible culture. Now, of these two things, people tend to be more passionate about the non-material, the stuff you can't see, okay? And maybe you're doubting me on this, or maybe not. This right here is something that is still hot in the news now. It happened several years ago when Colin Kaepernick took a knee during the national anthem, and as a way of protesting racial inequalities in our country. And regardless of how you feel about this, the controversy over this issue is a result of someone's attack towards invisible or non-material culture, which is the reason why I'm showing you this. The reason we care so much about this is because it is an attack on the values that we hold dear, or it is upholding values that we hold dear. So it was either taken as an attack or it's taken as he's a hero because he is advocating for equality and equal rights for blacks and people of all different races. It depends on how you see it. Still another example is your recent migrations. Okay. Does anybody know what this one over here on the left is? Anybody know what migration that is? In 2014, you start to see huge coverage of this massive Syrian migration due to the Syrian civil war, which started in 2011. Now, even though the war had been going on for several years, we didn't start to really care about it in the West until we saw images of children washing up on the shores of the Mediterranean because their crowded ships busted and broke while they were crossing the Mediterranean. And still over here, you've got migrants from Honduras and El Salvador who are moving in the thousands, even now, this is in the news right now, to the United States border. Part of the reason why people in Europe and people in the United States, fear migrant into their country, or fear having tons of people from different cultures and different groups, is because of the possible attack on their non-material or their invisible culture. This is just one of many reasons, but that's the reason why I'm showing it, is because in Europe in particular, when we look at the Syrian civil war and the migration caused by that, many of the people moving over this way are Muslims, and you've got a way larger Muslim population starting to be in countries like Germany and the United Kingdom and France. And it's a lot of conservatives are afraid of what that might mean for how those countries are going to be in the future. So just know that these things really play a role. Now, this right here is question 2 in the poll. So if you go into the polls, I wanted y'all to answer this question for me and see how well y'all been paying attention. And if y'all could do that real quick, go into the poll and answer that. I'm assuming that y'all can access the polls at any time. I've never actually worked with this program, but that's the way it looks to me. Maybe I need to. Can y'all see the poll? Well, maybe a few more seconds. Feel free also to put it in the chat if you want. Oh, no problem. Of course. All right, so I see where I've got at least a few answers. I only have a few people in the chat, but the answer to the question is D. All right, it's static and avoids change if possible. So we're looking at all the following of culture is true, except that would be the one. One of the first things I said on this review is that culture is always changing, and definitely the other things are going to apply as well. Don't worry, guys, you got another one right here. This is question number 3 in the polls. Good job, Kevin. Heck yeah. All right. So the key here to this question is it applies to Americans as a whole. And absolutely, you guys are correct. The answer is a sense of equality and fairness. A sense of equality and fair. We definitely don't worship ancestors. We don't have a state-sponsored religion either. So that's what we mean by this is a state-sponsored religion. We believe in the freedom of religion as protected by our Constitution. So absolutely, good job. One last time, and then there'll be some questions at the only 2 more questions at the very end after this. A group of related cultural traits is it's another one that I mentioned actually in this session already. And the answer is cultural complex. All right. So again, the key here is a group of related cultural traits. And cultural complex is going to be when you take something like what I gave you all the example of politics and religion and put them together to kind of help define the American South. That would be an example of a cultural complex. Good job, Phyllis. Together, artifacts in conjunction with non-material. When I say artifacts, I mean things you can hold and see and taste and all that good stuff. In conjunction with non-material elements of the culture can tell you a lot about who people are. All right. So if you take computers, for example, or cars or whatever, let's look at computers here. It is a symbol of access to information. It is a symbol of the freedom of pursuing education, as a symbol of good standard of living, of opportunity, of living in an MDC. It's also a symbol of English. A lot of the internet is in English, which makes it more accessible to a lot of the world. Many people in the world speak English as a second language. It also makes, or I guess is associated maybe with the West and with Western entertainment and economics. You use the computer to buy things online, to order stuff from clear across the world. And so in a lot of ways, computer represents way more than just a cool device you can play games on or do schoolwork on or whatever it is that you're trying to use your computer to do. When studying AP Human Geography, what is the most important concept in the course? I'm sure you guys have heard your teacher say this. Spatial context. Now, they might not have used the word spatial context, but they probably surely said why of where a few times. Surely. I love how the transcript there called that. They probably used the words why of where. They might have talked about Patterson's spatial tradition, or in the 5 themes of geography, you might have talked a little bit about the theme of place. In other words, the characteristics, or the theme of region, which compares 2 different groups based on characteristics across space. So when we talk about spatial context, we're looking at the why of where. So when we study culture, it's really important to make sure that we understand culture as it applies to spatial tradition or spatial context. In other words, where are these people going to be on the basis of these religious, I guess, of these cultural traits that we're studying? So right here, you've got a map that shows the religions in the United States. And over this way, you've got a map that shows different cultural realms at a global scale. So I've got this word scales of analysis. Whenever you hear that, what this means is that you have some geographic phenomena that happens on a local level, and then you have some things that are going to happen more at a global scale or at a global level. You've got global on the right, the more regional, I guess, or local-ish on the left. If you look at even more local, like maybe a county level, notice over here in the South, you've got a few counties that have religions that predominate that are not Southern Baptist. Being someone who lives in the heart of the American South, Baptist churches are everywhere, but so are Methodist churches, so are Lutheran churches. We even have Catholic churches around here. So, yeah, we can look at the map and it's going to show you red for Southern Baptist, but that's not the only kind of religion going on. You have to look at things and take it in at different scales of analysis. Now, connection to prior knowledge. I wanted to just take a 2-second review on regions, okay? Because really, one of the ways that you're going to spatially study and analyze culture is by looking at a regional level. Which kinds of regions is best used to help us understand culture? The 3 that we've looked at back in Unit 1. That is your formal, functional, and perceptual region. Well, culture can kind of be measured and looked at in all 3 ways. All right. A formal region, such as a mountain range, which would be a clearly defined formal region, could result in isolation, could result in a dialect. You've got a very clear and easily identified Appalachian dialect associated with people that live along the base of the mountain in Kentucky. I've got some family from Kentucky, and they sound really Southern. Many people might say I sound really Southern, but we don't sound the same. So dialect or language differences. Local cuisine, the kinds of food might be associated with animals or crops that can be grown in mountains that can't be grown in other places. And even local activities might be determined by the mountains as well. Functional regions, you have access to things that are broadcast on the radio at a local level. All right, you might have sports teams that bring people together. Perceptual regions, that also known as vernacular. So I don't know, surely y'all have been told this by your teachers, but perceptual and vernacular regions are exactly the same. All right, they are regions defined by certain cultural traits, but not so much defined by absolute boundaries. So you can look at the American South, or we just looked at that. The American South, here's the South, isn't it? But this is really showing you where a certain religion, or I guess a certain denomination of the Protestant church is going to be within the United States. Notice that Florida, is mostly, Catholic? So you can define the South, but there's all sorts of different ways to define the South. That's what we mean by perceptual region. All right. Have anybody heard of the word placelessness? Anybody using the Aaron Faubourg book for human geography in school? There was an individual, I believe that Faubourg mentions placelessness. That's the reason why I'm saying this. I know that Faubourg mentions sense of place back in Unit 1, but placelessness is kind of this idea that all places, especially places that are subject to the forces of popular culture, in other words, MDCs or urban areas where people go on business trips or on tourism or whatever it might be, they all look the same. I meant to show you guys some pictures of some fast food restaurants from all across the world. I forgot to put it in my PowerPoint. But they all basically look the same. Look at McDonald's here. It's going to look kind of like McDonald's in Europe, kind of like McDonald's even in Asia. They might have regional food listed on their menu that we don't have here. But for the most part, they look and feel and act the same. So you can go from region to region, even different places on Earth, on a business trip or on vacation, and not really get a full feel of the uniqueness that exists in a certain location because it's all kind of the same. Okay. I also wrote up here cultural landscape. When we think about spatial context and culture, a lot of this placelessness, a lot of the things that also make a place unique are seen in what we build and how we change the landscape to meet our needs. You've got churches in the American South. You've got cathedrals in Southern and Western Europe going way back to even prior to the Renaissance. You've got mosques in Southwest Asia. These are all things that are going to be a part of the cultural landscape in those regions. So yes, you do have regional uniqueness to the cultural landscape, but you also have a lot of this placelessness, which is associated with the globalization of culture and the economy. Another term that I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit in the context of culture is the idea of commodification. Commodification. Well, we know if you ever studied economics, a commodity is anything that can be bought and sold. All right, so you give some kind of a monetary value to this and makes it commodity. That might be a simplistic version of that word, but if you are going to commodify someone's culture, that means you make it something to kind of be bought and sold, and almost in a way, or kind of making it into popular culture, which we're going to talk more about in just a second. But making certain elements of a culture into a commodity is what the definition is. Examples of this might be feathers in hair. A lot of Native Americans would always put feathers in hair. And I don't know if y'all remember this, but back in the like 2005, 2006, maybe a little later, maybe about 2010, girls started to have these feathers kind of wrapped up in their hair. And yeah, I thought it was kind of cool, but maybe it lasted a day before everyone's kind of like, nah, feathers are so 2010. A burqa. You see these different fashion designers making different color burqas that are kind of controversial in the Muslim world. Tribal wristbands. There was a picture in, I think, again, the Faubourg book where Ashton Kutcher had on this wristband that he got from some traditional village or wherever he went. I'm not sure where he was or what the context is, but he was wearing this wristband that then kind of took off as like some kind of a fad because Ashton Kutcher was wearing it. And then most recently, this is something that I shared in the teacher Facebook page just last week, is this Jesse Jackson for President 88 shirt. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Jesse Jackson shirt isn't coming back here in the United States, even though weirdly I have seen someone wearing it recently. This shirt is being worn by Korean girls mainly in South Korea. When we talk about Korean, we almost always mean South Korea unless we specifically say North Korea, just to let you know. But in this case, this Korean girl is wearing a Jesse Jackson 88 for President shirt, and she probably doesn't know who the heck Jesse Jackson is. All right, Jesse Jackson, I was 5 years old whenever Jesse Jackson ran for president. So why are they wearing this? Well, according to the article that we read, nobody really knows for sure, but it could be a mix of several things. One of those things is that there is this popular K-pop artist who was born in 1988, and so he wears a 88 hat. And a lot of the girls maybe think that, I don't know, he's cool or whatnot, and so they want to wear that shirt. And next thing you know, someone kind of important or someone of a higher wealth or higher level of significance might be wearing the shirt, and it's going to take off and start to diffuse, which we're going to talk more about diffusion as well later on in the PowerPoint. But that's a good example of what we're talking about, looking at the commodification of someone's culture. They took an idea from American culture and made it into something that is a big deal in Korea. Another side of this is the concept of cultural appropriation. Now, what I did here was I just took the definition and screenshotted it, put it into my presentation. But cultural appropriation is the act of taking or using things from a culture that is not your own. Here's the key to it, especially without, where'd my mouse go? Especially without showing you that you understand or respect the culture. And I think that really is kind of the key to what cultural appropriation is. Otherwise, we would be seeing it all the time. Anytime something might diffuse into another culture, or from one region to another, or one country to another. But here's the best example of what you may remember from the news not too long ago of cultural appropriation. And really, it depends on how you view it. Do you think these girls, what this is this girl here in the middle posted this picture on her Twitter page. I think this might have even been last year. I mean, it was not that long ago. And it was her prom dress, where she chose to get what is known as a kipao. Okay, it is a traditional Chinese dress. And then she posed in like a kind of a, what everyone kind of took as a, like a fake kind of a Asian kind of oppose. And many people in the United States were kind of like, oh, this is cultural appropriation. I mean, why is she doing it? She doesn't know anything about Chinese culture, and here she is wearing this. People that were of Chinese American descent are like, I wouldn't even wear a kipao, and yet here is this girl wearing this, and kind of almost like she's just laughing in the face of our culture. This one quote came from this New York Times article. It was posted on Twitter. It says, "I'm proud of my culture," he wrote in another post, for it to simply be subject to American consumerism and cater to a white audience is parallel to colonial ideology. And so people were really kind of offended by this. Ironically, many Chinese individuals, after this was retweeted a million times, not really, but like, tens of thousands of times, Chinese women in China seem to mostly embrace the idea that this American girl is wearing a kipao. So ironically, it was something that was kind of individuals kind of called cultural appropriation in the United States, whereas individuals in China were kind of like, meh, it's cool. I like the idea that someone would, they were even honored in some cases that someone would wear a traditional Chinese dress. I haven't had anyone ask me a question yet, so I'm guessing that y'all are getting it. If y'all have any questions, please feel free to give me an ask in the ask a question box so we can look at that. When we talk about globalization, there are three different types of globalization, and two that we really discuss heavily in AP Human Geography throughout the course. And one of those is globalization of culture. The second, if you're wondering, is going to be economic globalization. And then the third would be like a political globalization. But if you look at globalization, which we discussed, in most classes are going to discuss this in Unit 1, it is the interaction and integration among people, companies, and governments at a global level, right? So what I mean by this is that globalization actually facilitates the idea of placelessness that we just talked about. It challenges local customs. What I mean by challenges local customs is if you live in some tribal village in sub-Saharan Africa where you speak a language that literally no one else in the world is going to speak, then you can either go on living a lifestyle as maybe a hunter-gatherer or maybe a farmer, or you can pursue education opportunity. How are you going to do that? Speaking a language that no one speaks. So what do? You go and you learn English. So then you can get on a computer and chase after opportunity that exists in the form of Western education, for example. So these are different ways that globalization of culture can lead to a challenge of local customs. Globalization can promote certain traits over others, like I just mentioned, the kipao. Also, ethnocentrism, and imperialization. When we talk about ethnocentrism, we're looking at the idea that one cultural group might feel like their ethnicity is superior to others. Regardless of how you feel this way, or if you feel this way, many cultural groups kind of take Western culture or American popular culture as somewhat of an attack on their culture. For example, you think about cultural imperialization. Everyone in the world today wears jeans, which is a huge symbol of American culture. So is that bad? No. But why if the Chinese, for example, are giving up their kipao to wear American clothes? Not that that's happening, but that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make, is that globalization of culture kind of leads to us all being very similar. English, John David English. English is a worldwide lingua franca, correct? Well, a lingua franca is going to be a language that is used as like an intermediary language between other languages. So really, it's going to be yes, it is probably the best example of a global lingua franca, but I wouldn't use that terminology because English is not spoken everywhere in the globe. But I know what you're saying, and the answer to that question would be yes. Many people, and if I had a picture of the British Empire, the former British Empire, many people that used to live in places that were colonized by the British obviously will speak English. And then there are many others that, because of internet and Western opportunity, education, and entertainment, are speaking a lot more English. Ironically, one of the highest ranked English speaking countries in a recent study was Singapore, which is a small Asian microstate, and they're choosing to use English as even over some of their old dialects and old other official languages. There's a dialect there called Singlish. In other words, mixed between Singapore's native languages. I think Tamil was one, and Cantonese. I'm not 100% sure. I might be wrong about that. But yes, don't want to get too much into that and off topic, but absolutely. Folk and popular culture then. So far what we've looked at is kind of an intro to what culture is, but another way of classifying it besides material and non-material is going to be looking at folk and popular culture. So what I've got here is some of the basic characteristics of folk culture. Homogeneous. Well, what does this word mean? We're talking about a group of people who are more or less the same, all right? They're ethnically the same. They are religiously and linguistically the same. They might have the same basic ideas or I guess ideals when it comes to government or when it comes to education or when it comes to the work they do, okay? Also, geographic isolation usually applies to a folk culture. The reason for that is because their culture is based in tradition. Tradition is usually an idea that, or I guess is usually a set of ideas that we don't want to change. So if something has always been done this way, we try to resist changing it up because I fix what's not broken. Art in a folk cultural group tends to be linked to a way of life. The economy in a folk cultural group tends to be linked to a way of life and also is dependent on the geography. There is whaling recently became legal again for a group of Native Americans that live along the, I want to say Northern California or Oregon, somewhere around that area. They have a culture that has economically been linked to hunting whales. And the United States banned the hunt of whales because whales in that area were apparently endangered. And so it really rocked the way these individuals in this Native American community would have lived. And so the point I'm trying to make here is the economy is linked to the way of life and is dependent on geography. You can't go anywhere else in the United States and hunt whales. You have to be along the coast where whales are going to be. And another thing that I wanted to point out, this little menu got in the way, but folk culture diffuses through relocation. We're going to look more at that in just a moment. Popular culture is kind of the opposite of all of these things. It is heterogeneous. So instead of being homogeneous, which means they're all the same, heterogeneous means that that culture is designed to appeal to everyone regardless of race, religion, and language. It's something that is designed to be bought and sold. The video game I was just now telling you guys about at the beginning of this presentation is all the characters in there speak Japanese or voiced by Japanese artists. I don't care. It's a fun game, right? It's not. That's not the point of the game. Linkin Park was really cool whenever I was in high school, and in my mind, it's still really cool now. And Linkin Park had a huge fan base in Japan. I remember seeing one time a concert, like a recording on YouTube of a concert that they had done in Japan, and all of the people there were singing the song. They were singing the words to "In the End." That's how far back I go with Linkin Park. But they were singing in English. They may or may not actually speak English. Okay. This part here about popular culture being designed to be bought and sold, I think is really probably the single biggest key to differentiating between the two. American music, American clothing, textbooks that we buy into for education, AP exams and AP courses, are all these things have a money value to them. All of these things are a part of really a popular culture. Usually when we think about popular culture, we think about things like music and sports, video games. These are all going to be things that have a price tag and are designed in some way to make money. Popular culture also spreads far and wide, all right, across region to region, across the whole country, and even intercontinental. I just mentioned K-pop a little while ago. Has anybody ever listened to K-pop or heard of K-pop or know what that is? in a strange roundabout kind of way, it's based on American culture that was kind of diffused over in Asia. They made it kind of their own thing, and now are kind of rediffusing it back into other parts of the world. Right now, Korea is probably the leading cultural force in East Asia. It used to be Japan. Gundam Style is K-pop. I don't know. I didn't say that for sure. I don't know if you guys remember that song, but you know, Gundam Style. Yep. I'm done with that. So another thing too about popular culture is that it facilitates Western ideals and is secular. What we say by secular is worldly. It doesn't adhere to any kind of religion, and it diffuses through expansion. I don't know if you guys have ever gotten the AP Human Geography AMSCO book, the review book. It's a really good review book. I think it's probably currently the very best and one of the most highly recommended by AP Human Geography teachers. I know that the people I've spoken to really love this book. But this is a page taken out of there that kind of re-summarizes some of those concepts we just looked at between folk and popular culture. And really, we just about said all this stuff. The only thing we didn't mention is over here where we looked at buildings and houses and food. Again, look, locally produced with folk culture, materials for houses are locally produced. There's a geographic spatial connotation to this. As a matter of fact, I do. John David L. Just a second. I got the book right here. That is on page 97. Page 97. All right. Now, with all that said, I want to focus on how this culture is going to spread, okay? And that is what when we talk about the spread of culture or the spread of anything, we're looking at diffusion. And there are two kinds of diffusion we're going to talk about. But don't get confused because, yes, there are four. But basically, you've got things that are going to move with the movement of people. So literally, the only way something can move through relocation is if human beings move themselves and take it with them. Okay, that's what we mean by relocation diffusion. And then the other kind here is expansion diffusion. Something is going to be strong at a center point, at a hearth or at a node, and it's going to expand outward and continue to be strong in the center point, but also be strong in places where it goes. And so expansion is the trait is diffused from its geographic hearth or center, node, whatever you want to say, and literally spreads or expands contagiously, hierarchically, or by being changed and adapted. So the different kinds of expansion diffusion we're going to talk about is contagious, hierarchical, and stimulus. I'm going to give you examples of all three. So we're just looking at folk culture. The Amish is a really good example of folk culture. I wish I had more time to talk more about the Amish culture with you, but we're really kind of scratching the surface here, and it's already been a good 48 minutes. But the Amish, no one wakes up in the morning saying, hey, I want to be Amish today. I want to go out and find an Amish community and join them. We wake up in the morning and think, well, I got to go to school, or maybe when I grow up, I want to be a doctor or a teacher or whatever it might be. But we don't grow up or I guess dream about being Amish one day. There's a reason for that, because it's a folk cultural group. And in order to be a part of that group, you have to kind of be born into it and culturally a part of it. That said, when their culture spreads, it's not because people just decided they're going to be Amish. It's because the Amish people have moved from one place to another within the country. Traditionally, this area around Pennsylvania in general, this Great Lakes area, kind of along here, Pennsylvania, Ohio, we got Amish have moved down into parts of Kentucky, parts of Tennessee, a little bit in North Carolina, but you got Amish people moving further west and further south in the direction of these arrows that I've shown you. the reason is because, honestly, the Amish populations are tending to grow in numbers. I was just reading something the other day about how the Amish tend to have maybe somewhere around 4, 5, or 6 kids. Well, you guys just got out of Unit 2. You learned a little bit about how that's not normal in the United States mainstream. We are right now at replacement. We're having about 2 kids per family, and our population is not growing due to natural increase. But the Amish populations are growing due to natural increase if they're having 5, 6, 7 kids. All right. So when a kid in the Amish community grows up and gets to be 18 years old, it's customary that they get given land and a house that they can have their own. And the community will get together and build them one, and they build it all together. And you can see on YouTube videos of Amish people building barns and houses and things like this because they really do a good job at taking care of themselves within the community. But if there's no land because there's a million gajillion people living in areas that are traditionally Amish, they're going to move further out where the populations are more sparse and land is more available and cheaper. So therefore, their culture is spreading across the United States via relocation diffusion. Other examples of relocation diffusion. The Witness is a good movie example of folk Amish culture. Yeah, you know what? I've seen, that's the one with Harrison Ford, right? Yeah, I hadn't seen that in a long, long time. It's also rated R, so make sure you guys watch it with your parents, unless you're 18 years old. Jokes. But yeah, it's been forever, but I do remember it being a pretty decent movie. I don't remember looking at it in the context of Amish culture, but there are so many different documentaries and things on YouTube. I'm a big YouTube guy, so I mean, I spend huge amount of time on there, and there's a lot of good stuff about the Amish. And in a weird kind of roundabout way, haven't we kind of made Amish culture into popular culture? What do y'all think about that? For a group of people who want to live in isolation and kind of think of it, of cameras as taboo, there sure are a lot of pictures of them, a lot of documentaries showing them. We've got TV shows about people breaking Amish, about people who might decide they don't want to be Amish. So in a lot of ways, we have kind of commodified the Amish culture as a whole. And that's part of the struggle between this local diversity and globalization we were just talking about. It's a challenge for them. They've got a big challenge ahead of them in trying to preserve their way of life in the face of a globalizing world. Spanish and English to the Americas in the 1500s, that would be an example of relocation diffusion. Catholic Christianity to South America would be an example of relocation diffusion. By the way, there are more Catholics today in South America than there are in Europe, by a landslide even. Soccer in many parts of the world initially would have been an example of relocation diffusion. However, soccer has recently, I guess in the 1800s, about the time of the British Empire, would have been more of a hierarchical diffusion. It would have been because soccer would start in big cities where a lot of people were, where a lot of British were, and eventually would have been adopted by locals in places where these populations would mingle. Then it would move to other parts of the world as well. So that would be examples of hierarchical diffusion. And today, many sports also move through contagious, which is kind of getting us into expansion diffusion. So contagious, hierarchical, and stimulus diffusion, they are all different examples of when something is strong at the center and then expands in every single case. So you don't have to see the relocation of people in order for something to expand through expansion diffusion. And that means contagious, hierarchical, or stimulus. That's the reason why I wanted to make that distinction there. So contagious diffusion would be like Christianity during the, maybe today, or like Mormons or Jehovah's Witness. I don't know if you guys have a lot of people that come and knock on your door and hand out Bibles and pamphlets and things like this, trying to convert you to their faith. But those are classic examples of contagious diffusion. When something is, they talk to you, they bring you into their faith, and then next thing you know, you convert and you talk to others and bring them into your faith. Pokemon Go, that was cool for a day. My brother still plays that. Y'all know that? That's cool. I didn't know that until he told me the other day, and I was like, wow, okay. Well, gotta catch them all, right? So Pokemon Go is contagious diffusion. Yeah. Bottle flip challenge, any kind of social media, any kind of a viral video. These are things that they don't pick favorites. They don't go to people who are rich or people who are young or people who are old. Anyone can be a part of these cultural, I guess, of these traits, and anyone is able to spread them in turn. So it doesn't pick favorites. That's contagious diffusion. Just like if you sneeze on somebody's face, you get them sick. It doesn't matter who they are or where they come from. They're susceptible to your germs in the same way contagious diffusion is going to spread like that as human beings come into contact with other human beings. You got this kid over here doing a dab. Maybe I'm not so good at that. Yeah, my students pick on me a lot. Hierarchical is like a lot of times. I mean, it isn't like contagious. It's like contagious in that it's expansion diffusion. But what you're looking at here is just like you might have a hierarchy from maybe a king to nobility to lords to regular everyday people. In the same way, a cultural trait that diffuses through hierarchical diffusion is going to diffuse from a place of extreme importance, like maybe New York City, to smaller cities like Atlanta, and then to smaller cities like Columbia or Raleigh, and then finally to the boondocks, like where I might live, or where some other rural area. But it's going to go first to places where a lot of people are, and then kind of jump. It's not going to contagiously spread. It's going to jump from one city to another. A really good example of this is most of our popular culture. Music. Taylor Swift doesn't come to Aiken, South Carolina to sing a concert. All right. She doesn't go to the Midwest somewhere like in South Dakota where there's nobody there but maybe 100 people. She goes to where she's going to sell out the auditorium. She's going to go to Columbia or to Atlanta or to Charlotte or to New York or Chicago or Los Angeles. All right. These are all places where these singers are going to go. And as they go on tour, they're bringing their product, their culture with them. And that's going to diffuse, hierarchically in the same way. Anybody ever heard of the Broadway show Hamilton? I'm not much of a Broadway guy, and I haven't seen it, but I've heard it's fantastic. It is a rap-based musical Broadway show about Alexander Hamilton. And it's definitely a classic case of hierarchical diffusion. Started in New York, was there, sold out all the time, and then has gone to other smaller cities where it continues to sell out. And I just saw whenever I was in Greenville in my state not too long ago, it was being shown there at one of their opera houses, which is Greenville is a big city, but it's not nearly as big as like Atlanta. And American football. Notice here I've got the London games scheduled. Did you guys know that American football is played, multiple games in the NFL every single season is played in London at a soccer stadium, the Wembley Stadium? Wow. Who'd ever thunk? But in fact, that is going on. And so that's an example of hierarchical diffusion because the football players aren't living in London. These are like the Seahawks, the Raiders, the Tennessee Titans, the Los Angeles Chargers. Our players are taking football to London. From London, football might go to other smaller cities within the United Kingdom, and maybe even at some point to other countries in the European Union. Another example historically is the early Christian communities. You guys have heard of the book of Corinthians in the Bible, or the book of Ephesus, or all these different epistles that were written by the Apostle Paul. They're named after the various cities where he started churches. And from those cities, Christianity began to spread contagiously. So notice that Christianity is the one example we've mentioned that is relocation, hierarchical, and contagious diffusion all at the same time. So one thing can spread in various different forms. That's important y'all understand that. It's all about the way it spreads. Another example of hierarchical diffusion, and I understand that we're an hour in. I have no problem keeping on going if you guys are with me. So as long as y'all are with me, I'm going to keep on going. We should be done in the next 10 minutes for sure. But cell phones are something that first appealed to, or first were in areas where there was a lot of people in large cities, in places where the wealthy had access. in places that are only in MDCs, initially the United States. Today, people in rural areas, people all over the world have access to cellular technology. And increasingly, more and more people in more rural areas and even poor countries are getting access to cellular technology. Reverse hierarchical diffusion would be the opposite of hierarchical. Rather than something come from New York City or from Washington, D.C., it's going to come maybe from some rural town, in some small population state and be diffused up. Examples of this might be slang words, or might be the idea of tattoos, or anything like this might get picked up by middle class or by upper class and then diffused throughout those populations after it was started by someone maybe of lower status, or maybe in more poverty-stricken regions. Or I guess LDCs is what I meant to say. Stimulus diffusion, this is the last one I wanted to talk with you about, and it's probably the most complicated form of expansion diffusion because a lot of times it's hard to think of examples, so I've taken care of that for you. But stimulus diffusion occurs when the underlying concept of a really good idea takes hold, but the idea itself does not. Now, I've given you some examples. The first example I gave you is the graphical user interface, GUI. It started with Apple before Apple was cool. So the Apple computer didn't take off, but the idea of the graphical user interface, which is being able to click with your mouse on icons in order to use applications rather than having to type in codes, which was based on the DOS operating system, you were able to, Apple started that. But IBM, which kind of cornered the market on computers, is the one that went with it and made the idea take off. It's a classic example of stimulus diffusion. Other examples are fast food. Big Mac, Whopper, the original chicken sandwich. They don't all have to be hamburgers. These are signature sandwich or flagship sandwiches that are similar to each other, but unique to that individual fast food restaurant. The idea of a flagship sandwich took off, and the restaurants made it their own. Another example having to do with fast food is the drive-through concept. I don't know if y'all have Chick-fil-A where you are, but I know, man, where I'm at, Chick-fil-A, that drive-through is going to stretch out to the road. You can put a Chick-fil-A on both sides of the street, and you're going to have a daggum line going all the way down to the road. But they've gotten slick about it. Rather than doing like what McDonald's has done with the the ordering kiosks, you can go through two lines to order your food and then go to two windows to get your food. What Chick-fil-A has done is they actually station workers. It's their pleasure to stay out there and take your order in the hot sun or in the cold rain or whatever it might be. They're going to be out there taking your order because, man, you got to get your Chick-fil-A. I hope you guys have Chick-fil-A where you're at so y'all understand what I'm talking about. But they've changed the drive-through to meet their needs. They didn't invent the drive-through, or they didn't do something completely different. They've taken an underlying concept. Yeah, Chick-fil-A, man. No kidding. I love it. And it's a good place to bring your kids, and it's always their pleasure. They're so happy to serve me. So that's what they've done. They've taken the drive-through and they've made it kind of their own thing. So that brings us to the last thing I'm going to give you. I got two questions for you. Just kind of reviewing what we looked at on diffusion. If you guys could go into the polls, this is question number 5 in the polls. I'm going to pull it up as well. I'll give y'all just a second to answer this quick question. And once we're done with these questions, that is it, unless I'll have some questions you have for me. And the answer is C, the spread of an idea or trait through the physical movement of people from one place to another. Why isn't it soccer? I actually mentioned this in the presentation. Soccer is, at that time, was being diffused hierarchically. Initially, when soccer is taken by people during colonization from one place to another that didn't stay where they were, perhaps that will have been an example of relocation. The next question and the last question that I have for you, all of the following are examples of relocation diffusion except which one? The answer to this question is actually E, the modern spread of the Mormon faith. And the reason is because Mormons they're knocking on doors or using missionaries to spread the word contagiously about their faith. I see that someone put the spread of baseball to Japan, but that would have been via relocation during the post-World War I, I guess World War II recovery, when American troops would have been the ones who proliferated the spread of baseball into Japan. And where today, by the way, baseball is huge in Japan. So maybe, I didn't talk about that in my presentation, but hopefully in your reading, maybe y'all see that, or maybe your teachers are going to talk about these things. And that right there wraps it up for me, unless you guys have any questions. We did go a little bit over an hour. I'll try to do better at calibrating my presentations, keeping them kind of between maybe 45 minutes and an hour, but we had a lot to say, and I wanted to say it. So any questions for me before we sign off? I wanted to, let me see if I can get this right here to work. I may not be able to. You guys, you can get access to things like the future replays on 5.me/live. If you need to go and do that, go for it. I need to do better at making sure I can demonstrate those things for you. But I'll be here again next week, Thursday at 7 o'clock. Right now, we're looking at language. So that's it. Thank y'all for being with me. I appreciate y'all's time.